The fight to put the Texas legislative priorities begins tomorrow as the legislature will officially be open for business. But will it come at a cost for grassroots Republicans, or will we see real change? It's time for some Straight Talk Texas. I'm Bunker Bob Steinhagen, and this is the Bunker Bob Show. Yes, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings, thrill seekers, music lovers, conversationalists from across the fruited plains of the great state of Texas. I am your host, Bunker Bob Steinhagen, bringing you an hour of unfiltered, unadulterated, and unapologetic conservatism to help make Texas and America great again. And I'm grateful to have you watching today on the Bunker Cam via Rumble, YouTube, or Facebook, and welcome my podcast listeners who are out there walking, driving in their cars, or wherever they are listening via Spreaker, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Deezer, iHeartRadio, Podchaser, or Podcast Addict. Now, before I get to the topic at hand, which is what I had led with, is I wanted to talk about quickly an update on the speaker race for the United States Speaker of the House. Of course, McCarthy won the race, and he was held up by the Conservative Freedom Caucus. I had Congressman Pat Fallon on my show last Friday, before the 14th vote, which turned out to be the vote before the final vote, which was the 15th vote. It was interesting, wasn't it? For those of you who watched, it was interesting to see Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert surrounded by members of the sorry, I got distracted a second, but by members of Congress who were just going after them for holding up the process of speaker. And in the end, they conceded, but when they got the concessions that they had demanded. Now, understand, it was clear to anyone who ever watched the actual debate. This isn't true for the lamestream media. It isn't true for even Fox or other news outlets like that, because it seemed like they were tone deaf to what the issue was. The Freedom Caucus members who were holding that up didn't trust Speaker McCartney. And they had tried to work in good faith well before this all took place. And instead of dealing with this in conference, or what I call caucus, but the correct terminology in conference, as has been done for 100 years, ever since the last time the speaker was challenged, the Republicans had the opportunity to make the decision in conference and to know when they came out to the floor of the House whether they had the votes, and Kevin McCarthy knew that he did not have the votes, which is why he pushed forward his insistence that the vote go to the floor to try to embarrass the Freedom Caucus. Well, what ended up happening is the Freedom Caucus got some concessions. The only problem is, and this was what Gaetz and Boebert and Chip Roy and many other of those on the Freedom Caucus were saying, just because McCarthy concedes to these issues does not mean that they're going to be approved by Republicans. And I thought what Lauren Boebert, the Congress member from Colorado, who by the way is a firebrand, just a fantastic, a true patriot. I wish there were more men like her. But one of the things that she talked about was when she was getting beat up on the lamestream media, on the left-wing media, was that, look, the problem is, this is a race for the leader of the party. And if the leader of the party can't get a vote to be leader, if he can't get everyone together, then how is he going to lead the Republican Party to pass legislation that is important to Americans and to the party? The answer is he can't. And so now we have a fight for those rules, those concessions that the Freedom Caucus was pushing. These from the, let's see, this I think is, this is not from the Texan, it is Texas Scorecard, from Texas Scorecard. And this is written by Michael Quinn Sullivan on January 7th. It became clear to 20 reform-focused members of the U.S. House that the only way to shake the grip of the cronies' control of Congress was to shake up the operations. Among these members were 3 Texans, U.S. Reps Chip Roy, Michael Cloud, and Representative-elect Keith Self. Quote, I came to Washington with the understanding that Congress was broken and in desperate need of restoration, explained Cloud of his actions. For several months, we have had good faith negotiations with Republican leadership and members to make the general change needed in Congress to restore the ability of members to represent the people and put our agenda ahead on the path toward fiscal responsibility. They were not trying to change who would be the speaker. They were trying to change the rules governing the chamber. The goal was not to force the passage of legislation, the report states, but to give fair hearings to the policy proposals that have long been supported by citizens and ignored by the uniparty of the Washington Beltway. The swamp does not readily allow itself to be drained. And one thing that Matt Gaetz said is you don't drain the swamp by putting the biggest alligator in charge of it. Quote, I want the tools or I want the leadership to stop the swamp from running over the average Americans every single day, said Roy from the floor of the U.S. House. The sentiment was echoed by Cloud in a statement on Friday. The reforms we've negotiated won't fix everything wrong with Washington. However, it will be a massive change in how the House operates and enables members of Congress to truly represent their constituents. Through it, McCarthy negotiated and conceded. The resulting changes put McCarthy in speakership that is weaker, perhaps, than it has been in a decade. And why is that? Well, because they have the ability through a motion to vacate the chair to get rid of or to cast a new vote for a new Speaker of the House, something that had been in place since has been in place until Nancy Pelosi took the speakership, and she did not want to be in peril. She did not want to be accountable. And so she did away with that. The report goes on to say, because of the 12 brave conservatives, the D.C. cartel in the House was brought to its knees before the American people, said Russ Vaught of the Center of Renewing America. Quote, this is the new paradigm coalition government. Vaught explained that the negotiated changes to the rules will provide independence from chamber leadership, quote, not seen in 60 years. All true, all absolutely, empirically, irrefutably true. Most notable is the creation of a committee that will operate with full authority and resources to investigate and hold accountable a federal government that has been weaponized against citizenry, added Vaught. Other reforms included votes putting the country on a path, finally, to balanced budget, as well as education reforms and setting the terms for the 2023 debt limit fight. It also included term limits. This is not part of the story, but term limits was part of that. Single subject legislation was part of that, which means that if you have a bill that is transportation related, you cannot put women's health issues on that bill. It has to be germane. So it is a germaneness type of rule that prohibits omnibus type bills from moving forward. with an open rule process. Earmarks must now be voted on and go with an up or down vote. And so these are some of the changes that would be made. But, folks, on last Friday, I told Congressman Pat Fallon when he was on, I basically said, he talked about how great the Texas delegation really was and how conservative the Texas delegation is. And I said, save Gonzales, Tony Gonzales. And he said, well, no, I don't know about that. And I said, no, wait a minute. Now, you guys put together border security framework that all of you signed except for Gonzales. He goes, wait a minute. Oh, he signed that. No, he did not. Tony Gonzales did not sign that. But if you want further proof, Congressman, which I will bring to him, if you want further proof, here it is. The swamp, this article by the Texas Scorecard, goes on to say, the swamp isn't happy. Texas Congressman, guess who? Tony Gonzales tweeted that despite his unflagging support for McCarthy as Speaker, he is not pleased with the concessions made to open up the processes of the House. Quote, I am a no on the House rules package. Welcome to the 118th Congress. That is your congressman here in Texas. If anyone ever tells me Tony Gonzales is a conservative, I will know immediately that they don't know what the heck it is they're talking about. And I will know immediately that they or I will know that they are part of the swamp, not a part of the solution. Tony Gonzales is an embarrassment to the Republican delegation. Tony Gonzales, is showing that he is a rhino, a Republican in name only. Just because someone has an R in front of their names, folks, does not make them a conservative. A Republican does not a conservative make. A veteran does not a conservative make. A white heterosexual does not a conservative make. There are so many things people just assume, well, if they're this, they must be a conservative. No, that's simply not true. Tony Gonzales is proving that. So that is one issue that wanted to address. The next issue is the border. Now, days before Texas legislature convenes, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has reported, his office reported that 340,000 illegal immigrants, including 23,000 accused criminals, have been arrested by state police and National Guardsmen via Operation Lone Star. In a news release on Friday, the governor's office also stated that more than 16,000 non-citizens have been transported to the cities across the country, including Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Abbott launched Operation Lone Star back in March of last year, of 2021, I should say. While securing the border is primarily a federal duty, Abbott and the state of Texas have acted to deter illegal immigration and provide supplemental law enforcement amid the border crisis. Now, in a report by Hayden Sparks of The Texan, he says that U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported 1.5 million encounters with illegal immigrants in Border Patrol sectors anchored in Texas during fiscal year 2022, which saw an all-time record for enforcement encounters. Of course, enforcement actions do not include those who evaded arrest by border agents and those who avoided detection altogether. What percent of those that slip through do you think there are, folks? Is that a fraction? Is that a half? Is that a majority? There were 2.4 million encounters along the southern U.S. border overall, including 2.2 million arrests between ports of entry. Before lawmakers meet at the Capitol on Tuesday, says the report, Republican David Spiller of Jacksboro, Representative Dave Spiller, Republican of Jacksboro, and Senator Bob Hall. We all know who Bob Hall is. He is our great congressman, and his placard is in my office. For those who watch the bunker cam, you see his placard. There's a reason. Senator Bob Hall filed bills, House Bill HB 82 and Senate Bill 237, to enable Abbott to enter into border security compacts with other states with approval from the U.S. Congress. In fact, Hall's bill would require the governor to do so. So it's not just that he can do it. Hall is telling the governor, you will do it. Last year, Abbott entered into border security agreements with the Mexican states of Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo Leon, and Tamaulipas after, and I butchered that one, after placing pressure on them by slowing down commerce, requiring enhanced security checks by the Department of Public Safety of vehicles entering Texas. Folks, don't forget, as an aside, I want to remind you that when Donald Trump was president, it wasn't just that we were building the wall, but President Trump had worked with the president of Mexico to protect our border as well, which is why it wasn't just the wall that prevented people from coming over. It was the actual Mexican government that was preventing people from crossing the border. That is no longer the case. Spiller also filed a bill to increase the criminal penalties for certain crimes committed while entering the country illegally. In a similar vein, Representative Brian Slayton, who is Brian, we all know who Brian Slayton is. His placard is on my wall, is on the door of my studio next to Bob Hall. Brian Slayton of Royce City filed a bill to create a special criminal statute for criminal trespassing by an illegal alien. Folks, I'm telling you, the people that are on this door, these are the people who are making a difference. And and by the way, as you saw last Friday, Congressman Fallon and I had a very spirited discussion, and he is coming in studio soon, and we will continue that discussion. And I'm keeping his placard up because I still believe that Congressman Fallon is a conservative, even though he's not a member of Freedom Caucus. I think he should be. I think he should make it clear to everyone that he is a member of Freedom Caucus, but that is neither here nor there. I digress. Slayton also filed a bill to set up a border security enhancement fund, part of which would be used to complete the Texas border, the Texas border wall, and name it after, how about this? You'll love this, after President Trump. I love it. Who is running for the White House again in 2024. HB 209, Slayton's bill, would allow the use of eminent domain for the law and require the governor to seek reimbursement from the federal government. Now, I'm going to be speaking. I have another report about Ken Paxton. The Office of the Attorney General made an announcement in a news release on Thursday saying the rule had cost Texas taxpayer upwards of $1.67 billion. The Biden administration, quoting Paxton, the Biden administration is committed to opening the borders to aliens who lack the ability to take care of themselves. Texans should not have to pay for these costly immigrants, nor should any other American, Paxton said. I will continue to defend the rule of law, and fight to ensure that the massive cost of illegal immigration do not further burden taxpayers. The Attorney General contended that the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 requires the government to consider certain factors when admitting immigrants to determine whether they will become a public charge. Texas, in other words, are they going to be on the public dole? Texas claims that a rule published by the administration in December illegally disregards those provisions of law. Quote, since 1882, federal immigration law has barred the admission of aliens who are unable to take care of themselves and will become public charges, the state wrote in its complaint. The complaint is the latest in a series of legal actions Paxton has taken against the federal government over border security and illegal immigration. The border crisis was the centerpiece of Paxton's successful re-election bid, which ended with his defeat of Democrat nominee Rochelle Garza in the general election. So Slayton is proposing a bill that basically demands that the federal government reimburses. Paxton is in the legal side, suing for the federal government for reimbursement. Basically suing the Biden administration over a rule placing massive cost of illegal immigration on taxpayers. Now, the last time the legislature met in session was October 2021 for the purpose of redrawing the maps for legislative districts after the delayed publishing of the results of the 2020 census. That was at the very beginning of the federal fiscal year 2022. Each fiscal year begins on October 1st, during which the CBP reported the record-setting number of enforcement encounters with illegal immigrants. The 87th Texas legislature appropriated approximately $4 billion for Operation Lone Star, according to Abbott's office. The task for the 88th will be to decide how much taxpayer funding should be allotted for Abbott's signature border security effort. Now, of course, Democrats and other critics have pointed to the cost of the operation compared to its limited results. Limited results, like what the Biden administration is doing. Despite Abbott's efforts, there was a substantial increase in enforcement actions in Texas Border Patrol sectors from fiscal year 2021, which saw 1.1 million encounters. The legislature will also have the opportunity to provide more funding for the state's border wall project, which received bipartisan support during the second special session in September of 2021. Led by House Appropriations Chairman Greg Bonin, Republican of Friendswood, the Texas legislature passed an additional $1.2 billion in border security funding. Last week, Comptroller Glenn Hager updated his estimate of the budget surplus for the 2024 to 25 biennium, which I have here that we're not going to get to today, but I do want to talk about it because I've talked about the budget in previous shows, and it had not been finalized. So that just came out, which he projected in July of 2021. The surplus would be at $27 billion. It is conceivable that Republicans may want to spend a portion of that sum on border security. That will undoubtedly face opposition from some Democrats who contend that characterizing the southern border as a disaster zone is hyperbolic, or even, what do you think they're going to, what's the other term they're going to use? Racially charged. Racially charged. When in doubt, if you have no other thing to blame if you have no other defense, just charge racism. That's why Democrats, that's why anyone who says they're a Democrat, I just look at with great concern. How can someone be so stupid? The GOP controls both houses of the legislature, and the Republican Party of Texas has made securing the border a high priority item on its agenda. Now, this is an important thing. And so when we talk about it being at the top of the agenda in June of last year, I should say, Republican activists, we gathered in Houston for the Republican State Convention. And we had a list of 16 or 17 parts of the platform that the Legislative Priorities Committee had highlighted for the delegates to decide which would be our 8 legislative priorities. And those 8, and I've talked about it before, but I want to continue reminding us all what our legislative priorities are. 1 is to protect our elections. 2 is to secure the border and protect Texans. So election integrity is first, and securing the border and protecting Texans is second. Democrats don't care about protecting our borders, as you will watch in this legislative session. And Tony Gonzalez, our Texas congressman, is part of the problem. When the entire Republican caucus gathered together to create a border security framework that they signed and gave to and put forward to the Biden administration and put forward to Congress, Tony Gonzalez didn't sign it. In a report from Texas Scorecard by Sidney Henry, this was on January 6th, grassroots organizations such as Texans for Strong Borders, the Texas GOP, and True Texas Project, as well as policy experts, are prioritizing border security ahead of the Texas 88th legislative session. So when Sidney writes that, such as Texans for Strong Borders, the Texas GOP, she means the Texas GOP, the delegates, the grassroots, the people. Quote, visibility is so high on the crisis, we may actually get this done, end quote, says Chris Russo, president of Texas for Strong Borders, told Texas for Strong Borders. Texans for Strong Borders is advocating for a legislative resolution declaring an invasion and for dedicating a portion of the state budget to repelling the invasion. Quote, the fact that it's happening on this scale means Texas has to do something, end quote, said Russell. And if you watched, by the way, folks, if you watched any of the debate by the Freedom Caucus members who were opposing McCartney for Speaker, you would have seen that they were that they highlighted the Texas border again and again and again, how porous it was and how much of a national concern it should be to everyone. The Texas GOP has made securing the border and protecting, I've already talked about the legislative priorities. However, True Texas Project acknowledged that Governor Greg Abbott ultimately holds the power to secure the border. Quote, the only solution is for Governor Abbott to stand up and actually do something instead of just talking about it, end quote, says Frank Rhodes, president of True Texas Project. However, Rhodes does expect that the legislature to make monetary appropriations to facilitate necessary border security efforts. And don't forget, folks, the $1.7 trillion package, omnibus bill, that was approved just before Christmas, that was approved by some Republicans in the U.S. Congress, that Kevin McCarthy could not persuade to not sign or not vote in favor of it. He's such an effective leader. That omnibus bill literally said that none of that money, none of the $1.7 trillion could go to protect the border of Texas. Not one penny. In fact, it requires the removal of box trailers that had been placed upon the border as a temporary barrier to entry for some people. I want you to think about how insane this is. You are literally saying, don't put any money toward the Texas border. And we have Democrats in the state house who are literally saying we shouldn't put any money toward our border, to protecting our border. Where do you think that they're getting elected? How do you think they're getting elected? They're getting elected by bringing people in, making them live off the dole and dependent upon government. They are the slave masters. The Democrat Party is the proverbial slave master of America today. And that is exactly what we're seeing. The Democrat Party is putting people in chains, making sure that they are dependent on them. We are the solution to your problem. That's what they want people to believe. But as Ronald Reagan once said, government isn't the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. But too few Democrats know that. The sentiment that was made by Fran Rhodes of the True Texas Project, that Abbott needs to actually do something, was echoed by Wade Miller, executive director of the think tank Center for Renewing America, which has put forth the plan for states to declare invasions and defend the border using Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Now, if you recall, back during the primaries, I had gubernatorial candidates and lieutenant governor candidates in a candidate forum here in studio. And that was one of the questions I asked. Would you enact this clause that we are being invaded and declare an invasion so that we as a state can start protecting our own borders? Because according to the Constitution, the borders are the job of the federal government, not the state, unless we are being invaded. Going back to the article, the state of Texas has the power to remove, repel, not deport illegal borders crossers back into Mexico under an invasion declaration, explained Miller. Until then, but perhaps to a slightly lesser degree, they are responsible for the out-of-control open borders problem facing Texans, along with President Biden, DHS Secretary Mayorkas, and A.G. Garland. Quote, the status quo is not a solution, and adhering to the statute's status quo is tacit admission that they won't do anything about the problem, Miller told the reporter. That's unacceptable from federal or state leadership. So, border security is the second greatest legislative priority, most important legislative priority for the GOP, and it appears to be an important issue for people like what did we say? We said Brian Slayton and Bob Hall. There's a reason why they're on my show a lot. Because they actually care about freedom. They actually care about protecting America. While so many others are in office just to hear themselves, speak. Now, another legislative priority, and as I go through the stacks of information, preparing for today's show was the biggest challenge sometime in preparing for a show is kind of weeding down all of the information so that it can be encapsulated into a 1-hour show. And if I don't have enough information to do a 1-hour show, I don't do a 1-hour show. I'll do it as long as there's information that's useful. I don't believe in wasting people's time. But so the first two, protecting our elections, securing the border, and protect Texans. The third is banning gender modification of children, and the fourth is stop sexualizing Texas kids. Let me read for you what these two actually say as the GOP delegates, I was a delegate, proud delegate, what we wrote as part of this. And by the way, banning gender modification of children was one of the party platforms that I presented during the precinct convention, went to the county convention, went to the state, and then went to the state convention where it was adopted and became a legislative priority. It reads, Texas must ban chemical castration, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, genital mutilation, bodily alteration surgery, psychological, social transitioning, and any other methods applied to or performed on children. The Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids reads as follows: repeal Texas Penal Code obscenity, quote, obscenity exemption 43.24C, which allows children access to harmful, explicit, or pornographic materials, and 43.25F2 and 3, which allows sexual performance by a child. In addition, prohibit teaching, exposure, and or discussion of sexual matters like mechanics, feelings, orientation, or gender identity issues, and prohibit use or provision of related books and other material using criminal, civil, or other enforcement measures. So that is your third and fourth legislative priorities voted on by delegates in June at the Texas Convention, at the Republican Convention of Texas. Now, in another report by the Texas Scorecard, a letter was signed by more than 1,000 Texans and was sent to Governor Greg Abbott asking him to declare the sexualization of children an emergency. The effort was organized by Bonnie Wallace of Llano County. In an email to the governor, she explained her interest in the issue on finding, quote, pornography, sexually explicit and pervasively vulgar content directed at children in her local library. The letter is signed by 1,177 activists from around the state of Texas. And if you are watching the bunker cam, these are the counties that are filled in where these signatories came from. And as you can see, it's all over the state of Texas. Legislative solution, quote, legislative solutions that eliminate this material in every library in Texas are needed as local policy is failing to address the problem, and the state has a compelling interest to intervene and protect Texas children, wrote the signers. Ultimately, the responsibility will fall on the legislature, but if you designate this issue as an emergency item, then it has the ability to move more quickly through the process. The clock is ticking and every day matters. Under the constitutionally defined rules of the legislative process, legislation cannot be considered on the floor of either chamber unless it has been designated an emergency by the governor. The governor's office did not respond to a request for comment on the letter at the time of the publication of this article. So you have activists in the state of Texas that are moving forward and trying to move the this legislative priority forward to ensure that this is not missed. In another article, they're in two other articles, both on January 6th, one written by Sully Rice, the other written by Aaron Anderson. The first, one by Aaron Anderson, Texas backs Florida law protecting kids from sexual content. Texas is providing legal support for a Florida law designed to protect children ages 9 years old and younger from exposure to sexual content while in school. Similar legislation may soon be considered by the Texas legislature. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton announced Thursday that he and 13 other Republican state attorneys general filed an amicus brief in federal court that supports Florida's Parental Rights and Education Act, HB 1557, which protects students in the third grade and below from classroom discussion about age-inappropriate subjects such as sexual orientation and gender identity. Quote, parents have a strong interest, and thus the state has a strong duty in preventing children from being exposed to sexual instruction that is not age appropriate, Paxton argues in the brief. The law also requires school districts to allow parents access to all of their children's student records and to notify parents if school officials provide their children with any mental, emotional, or psychological health services. And this should seem common sense, right? And for most in the audience that's listening, you're saying, why is that a big deal? But that's where we've degraded as a society. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the measure into law in March of 2022. Two LGBTQ plus advocate groups and several individuals quickly sued to block the bill, claiming it violates the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. And the title, the First Amendment, it violates the First Amendment of the Constitution. The teaching and educating of children this nonsense. That there's a difference between the freedom of speech, and here's the thing that I don't understand. Freedom of speech is the freedom to express oneself, but to educate is to indoctrinate. What you're putting in the minds of children is not an expression of opinion. Education is, or should be, is supposed to be an exercise in fact, in what is true, in what is honorable, in what is right, not expressing the opinions of a political position group. A federal judge dismissed the suit in September, saying the plaintiffs lacked standing. The two groups withdrew, but several individuals are still challenging the law. Why did it lack standing? Because it is not an issue of free speech. This is the insanity that has encapsulated the education system in America today. Paxton says Florida's parental rights measure does not discriminate or violate anyone's right to expression. Exactly. Quote, in reality, the law ensures that children aren't exposed to content that is entirely inappropriate for their age, Paxton said. Beyond that, it also guarantees that elementary school students can focus on learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic and science rather than the left's sexual ethics agenda. Now, Texas lawmakers have filed similar measures ahead of the state's 2023 legislative session. House Bill 1155 by State Representative Jared Patterson of Frisco would prohibit providing instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity to students in kindergarten through 8th grade or to any K through 12 students in a manner that, quote, in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. I'm not sure that the wording on his bill is sufficient. I just think you just need to put it, period. Just put a period after that. Don't talk about because what is appropriate to one is inappropriate to most of us, the way that things are going today. Patterson's bill would also require school districts to notify parents of any mental, emotional, or physical health services provided to the students at school. And interestingly, I actually didn't know that wasn't already happening. I just assumed my children don't go to, my daughter does not go to a public school. She goes to private school. They do that as a matter of procedure. It's always happened. She got a Band-Aid one day. got a notice that she had a Band-Aid. She received something else. It was no big deal. But the smallest things I get a notice about. Why wouldn't a school want to inform parents of that? Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids is a priority for the Texas GOP this legislative session. Legislation that addresses community standards is especially important at a time when elements of the left are fighting to have drag queen shows in elementary schools, parents restricted from involvement in the students' lives, and woke sexuality instruction for students everywhere, to being force-fed puberty blockers and sterilizing cross-sex hormones. In response, grassroots organizations throughout the state are rising up, demanding an end to the sexualization of children. Texas Family Project, the Texas GOP, and True Texas Project are fighting to put an end to it. These three organizations recently announced that ending all ages and family-friendly drag shows is one of their top priorities for the 88th legislative session. Now they're furthering their call to end the sexualization of children and urging the end to child gender mutilation. Okay, now first of all, let's just talk about freedoms, and I am a constitutional conservative. So here's where I might separate myself from what they're talking about. They want to stop. They want to stop all ages and family-friendly drag shows. It's one of their top priorities. If a private business wants to have what they call a family-friendly or all-ages drag show, that should be the right of the business, of the private business. And what happens is then it gets a lot of attention and people come out and protest it and say, this is insane. I think as grotesque as these types of things are, the right to do these things is okay. However, it's what they do at these events. As I showed on a show just last week, about 2 weeks ago, we showed video from one of these drag shows. And it wasn't just people getting out and having and dressing in drag and doing impressions of famous women, men dressed as women. No, which, and in my naivete, I just assumed that that's what drag shows were. They were an attempt to be a woman and famous women and basically become them. That's what my understanding was. When you saw this, and it was a video taken by a reporter, by an underground type of reporter, and he showed what was going on. What was happening in that drag show was beyond sexually provocative. It was pornographic, truly pornographic. And the fact that there was a child there whose parents weren't there, they were outside, and this child was frightened, as you saw in the video, that should be a violation of the law. But to say that a drag show is prohibited, that is a violation of the Constitution. And I never in my life would I allow my daughter or would we attend something like that, but the right to do it. And it goes back to the fundamentals of what free speech and free expression is. It should be people should be able to express themselves. But there comes a point at which if it becomes pornographic, then you have a violation of the law. If you present pornographic material or take pornographic or sexual actions toward children, that should be a violation of the law. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now, the True Texas Project announced they want chemical castration, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and genital mutilation surgery on all minor children to be defined as child abuse, something I would agree with wholeheartedly. It's part of the platform position that I presented early last year during precinct convention. While utilizing fines and license revocation for medical practitioners and insurance companies. Fran Rhodes, president of TTP, said, quote, "We at TTP want to clear all those gender modification things, illegalize child abuse, and fine penalties for the practitioners who do it and the insurance companies who fund it." TFP President Chris Hopper agrees, saying that one of TFP's goals for the upcoming session is to help promote and author legislation to be enacted into law that would hold individuals and organizations accountable when they hurt the family. The Texas GOP list of filed legislation that would halt child gender modification includes House Bill 888 by Shelby Slauson of Stephenville, House Bill 776 by Brian Harrison of Waxahachie, House Bill 41 and 122 by Steve Toth of the Woodlands, House Bill 42 by Brian Slayton, House Bill 672 by Cole Hefner, Senate Bills 250 and 249 by Bob Hall of Edgewood, all, by the way, Republicans. Rhodes and Hopper told the Texas Scorecard that ending child gender mutilation has the highest probability of passing in the Texas legislature this session. The whole sexualizing kids issue probably has the best chance of being dealt with in the legislature because people are just so hot about that statewide. If we can bring enough grassroots pressure to bear on child gender mutilation, then it has a chance in the legislature, Rhodes said. Quote, "We live in a day and age where we must take a stand and no longer turn a blind eye to blatant child abuse." I would agree. From double mastectomy surgeries to, where it all starts, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, we have to have this hard conversation regarding the innocent among us, Hopper said. In no conceivable situation should a minor be subjected to the use of said drugs that will have ramifications well into their 20s and 30s. We are crazy enough to believe that children are worth protecting and that the family should be the most powerful special interest group, both in Austin and in D.C. I couldn't agree more. Well, folks, those are some issues that are really important that are coming into this legislative season. And finally, now this is not, by the way, one of the legislative priorities necessarily. It was one of those that was made the final. It was one of the 16 that was put before, 16 or 17 that was put before the GOP by the delegates at the convention as a possible legislative priority. And this is about prioritizing medical freedom. This is an article by Katie Drollinger, again, Texas Scorecard. This was from January 5th. Texans for Vaccine Choice, TFVC, is calling on lawmakers to pass more medical freedom protections for Texans during the state's 88th legislative session. As Texans continue fighting for vaccine choice, the Grassroots education and advocacy group is encouraging legislature to protect citizens' rights to informed consent and medical privacy. The organization is also drawing attention to no shot, no school campaigns, which prevented students from attending school if they did not receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Although the vaccine choice is not an official Republican Party of Texas priority for the upcoming legislative session, the party's platform includes measures calling for the state, calling for this. And this was, by the way, it was, as I said, it was one of those final potential legislative priorities. To protect Texans from medical discrimination, TFVC is promoting legislation prohibiting vaccine mandates, requiring doctors to provide patients with a vaccine's full ingredient list, and clarifying that participation in Texas MTRAC vaccine database is, get this, optional. What a novel idea that your medical history is private. What a novel idea, isn't it, folks? Several Republican legislatures, including State Senator Charles Perry of Lubbock, State Reps Steve Toth of the Woodlands and Candy Noble of Lucas, have already filed legislation to protect Texans from COVID-19 vaccine discrimination. State Representative Brian Harrison of Waxahachie is also refiling his Texas COVID Vaccine Freedom Act, which would prevent any entity from coercing individuals to take the COVID-19 vaccine. However, TFVC is calling on lawmakers to include their vaccine in their legislation. With well-articulated bills already filed to prohibit COVID-19 mandates or discrimination based on COVID-19 vaccine status, TFVC expects that Texans will be protected from government's overreach, specifically with regard to COVID-19 vaccination, said the organization. However, these efforts need to extend to all vaccinations for all Texans if our legislators sincerely believe in medical liberty. Now, after the Texas Senate's Committee on Health and Human Services called for an end to COVID-19 mandates, TFVC said they were hopeful about the momentum of the state Senate, but placed responsibility with the Texas House, particularly with the recent state Senate Health and Human Services Committee report. We are optimistic that the Senate will easily pass measures to defend medical privacy and liberty, the group told Texas Scorecard. The onus will again be on the House to act swiftly and the governor as an opportunity to be a positive influence in this regard by prioritizing medical liberty. In the 88th legislative session, folks, it's going to be an interesting legislative session for sure, and I'm looking forward to it, as I'm sure all of you are as well. There is a lot going on in there, and I do think that there is a lot to be said for that. Excuse me. And so I hope that if you have not already, that you will contact your state rep and your state senator if you have not already done so, and let them know where you stand on these issues, because that is what makes a huge difference when it comes to enacting and changing legislation for the better. And so I just hope and pray that you will get involved, get active, and make sure they hear your voice. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the opening of the legislative session. God bless you, and bye-bye.